Welcome back to Secret Weapons, and today we're going to take a look at the Morningstar MC8. I've gotten a lot of questions about the hows and whys of my MIDI implementation for a long time, and I've been meaning to do a video on it for some time now. And my problem is I always change my pedalboard around too much to have a consistent sound, to have a consistent set of banks that I can kind of rely on, and that I ever felt like was fleshed out enough to really kind of explain how things are supposed to work on my board, because I would set it up for a weekend and then I would tear the board apart. But over the last 2 weeks or so, we've kind of stumbled onto what I'm considering to be a pretty long-term solution, hopefully. So with that in mind, I took the time and I dialed, I think I've really dialed in my Morningstar MC8. And so yeah, let's just we're just going to walk through some of the presets, some of the implementation. We're just really going to talk about why I think the MC8 is so great and how I use it. So let's get started. Let's go to the top-down camera. Okay, first things first. This is my home page. I guess first things up, let's talk about how I organize the MC8, because you have these pages of just open slots that you can put presets in and you can do whatever you want with them. You can kind of organize however you want. Do you want to just do banks with different like combinations of effects? You can do that. For me, the way that I implement this is I really like to kind of divide up the different effects and have quick preset recalls of specific sounds on specific pedals that I really like. So let's start off by looking at my Specular Tempest bank. So let's just jump up to that really quick. Okay, here we have, on this board, the Specular Tempest is being used as a reverb. So what I've done is basically set up a bunch of predetermined sounds for that pedal. So we have different spatium. I did this in my review. I still don't know how it's pronounced. We have a couple different sounds for that. So we've got like a medium, a large, and max. And of course, a kill dry. And of course, if you've been following me on Instagram recently, you know that I've become obsessed with the plate mode. So we have a medium plate, and then a reverb and delay combo for when you need that kind of second delay line. Oh, and of course, on my home bass, I've also got my tap tempo. So I've got slow tempo, or something quicker. Let's dial that back to something more reasonable. Similarly, the Walrus Audio D1, because it's the delay, I've got a tap on there. I've got just some basic go-to things. It's the same kind of thing. Let's actually move the Specular Tempest down to a plate so you can actually hear the delay. Back up to the D1. And we have our go-tos. We've got our tape delay. Our digital. Our reverse. But this bank actually also brings in something that I really like, which is why I'm glad that we're doing it second, which is one of the options, preset H in the top right-hand corner, is dual normal, and that takes you to a standard dual delay. And with all of these presets, all it's been doing is changing the program recalls on the Walrus and not changing any other parameters. And by that I mean like time and stuff like that. But you see we have dual big in there, and what dual big does is it pulls up a dual delay mode, but it also activates a 50 BPM MIDI clock. So it overrides the tap tempo that I put in earlier that you can still see flashing on the bottom right, but it takes you to a slower delay time. So let's tap in something quick. So you hear how fast that is. You throw that in there. And you get that really slow, and you can obviously, you can override it back the moment you leave the preset, but you can kind of start stacking and integrating different things into it, which I find to be really, really helpful. I believe it's 16 independent messages per preset, which is a lot. And I've gotten close to filling that. I haven't done it yet, but let's take everything up another step. I think a good example would be like the Enzo. So let's go D1, dual normal, Enzo. So Enzo off with a medium plate and a dual delay. Slow it down a little bit. Okay, the Enzo, as you know, is one of my favorite pedals, but it's also very complicated and very dense and very intricate. And I really do believe that it's kind of a fool's errand to try to really, really use the Enzo to its fullest potential without something that manages presets and everything. And even beyond presets, just CC commands, the ability to modulate parameters on the fly. So here we have our bank that has some basic stuff, a bypass, and then kind of some of my go-tos, and the ability to turn the delay on and off for the Enzo, which is really handy because it has its own built-in delay that sometimes you want and sometimes you don't. But let's start with chords. What about synth bass? Or what about not even synth bass? What about just bass? So Whales is based off of an old YouTube video I did that kind of blew up a little bit. And it's an ARP, an octave up, with a little bit of legato, kind of like stretching the time. When you change chords, it'll kind of drag the pitch up and down a little bit, which is really cool. And this is one of those ones that having that delay turned on is really handy. Oh, and it's worth noting that in all of these, you can see that I've always got home in the bottom right-hand corner. And that's because wherever you are in this thing, dry swell. You can get home to one of your other settings, home, up to the D1, big dual, and get just massive sweeps. So you can kind of like Lego build all of these different pieces together quickly without having to like kind of sit down, hold the alt button on the Enzo to get to your submenus, without having to go through the D1's 3 toggle system to set up all your different tweak parameters. You can do everything so much faster, which is so nice. Another reason that the Enzo is such a good page to go on to third is you can see on this on this device, you've got your bank down and your bank up by pressing A and B together or C and D together. If you press B and C together, it actually toggles to a second page on the same bank. So on this Enzo page, I have these sounds available to me here, but I wanted a few more. So I've got my dry swell and my chords and my wails in space and my faux bass and my ability to turn my delay on and off, but I can press those two together. Let's turn Looper off. This is a good lesson, by the way. Looper allows the device to react much more quickly to your presses and send out the commands, which is great for controlling a looper. We'll get into that in a minute. But it's also not great if you're trying to do stuff like press 2 buttons at once. So now that we've turned looper mode off, go up to Enzo, press those two together, and now we're on page 2 of this preset page, which means I have my octave up, and one of my other favorite things, my power chord thing, which is like a fifth below or something. It's pretty dope. So yeah, 2-page system for some of these more robust, one of these more robust devices that you maybe don't want to spend a bunch of consecutive banks up and down because you only have 30 banks total. But with this, you functionally have about 60 banks, and with each preset having a toggle function, which we'll get into in a second as well, it really kind of like really opens up how much you can do. So I talked about the ability to kind of jump around between different pages to pull up settings really fast. But what if I want a preset that has all of them? What if I want to pretend that I'm using a helix or whatever? Great news. Let's go to my setlist page, which is where I threw together a couple of really quick sets of multiple messages being sent at the same time. This is what I was kind of doing at the start of the video where my guitar was just modulating from dramatically different sound to dramatically different sound. This is that part of the video. These are just a series of quick pieces that I put together, or these are a series of quick patches that I put together that basically just let you kind of showcase that. Things like chord wash, that's Enzo, D1, Specular Tempest, super washy, and a weird reverse delay thing on the mood. Pad swell is the same kind of thing, but it's dry guitar instead, and the plate reverb instead of the spaceship. TP is simply just tape and plate. Ambient is spatium and kind of a washy delay. Ambienter is just more of that. Bass is what you think it is. I need to set it up so that it turns off the D1 when it does that, but it does take me to a really subtle plate reverb, which is better for bass. It's not bad. This is a good time to turn that looper back on. Oh, and by the way, it's worth noting, press and hold, you can see what message you're sending on a toggle. So that top right H preset, that will send a turn looper mode on and looper mode off signal to the device. And it's set to toggle so that every time you press it, it sends the opposite message. I guess it doesn't have to be the opposite. It can be just 2 banks of messages on one switch. But in this situation, it's turning looper mode off or on. So we are entering looper mode. So this is now in looper mode. And with that in mind, let's go to our looper. This is actually a good time to kind of dig into some of this stuff. So we are now in looper mode. Let's go up to my blooper page. And I'll give you a quick run through of what the blooper page looks like on my device right now, because this is probably the most inventive, the most ambitious, the most complicated version of this thing that I do, and is also why the MC8 is so impressive to me. So page 1 of the blooper preset pages, you have record, dub, play and stop, loop, which we'll get into in a second, and erase. Erase has a little 2x next to it. I have it set up that you have to double tap to erase whatever is in the recorded section of blooper, and that's so that you don't accidentally erase it. Loop, if you press it, turns into delay, and what that is that's sending a CC message that switches between a full repeats knob on the blooper, which means it will loop forever, which is loop, or if you press it, it takes that repeats knob up to around noon, which will allow it to function more like a delay, where when it's in record mode, those repeats those looped samples will actually fade away pretty quickly, which is really nice to be able to switch between those two things. From this page, however, we get into a couple other really interesting things, which is up here we have library, where I can recall a bunch of saved loops. Ooh, I remember this one. This hasn't been released yet. We're going to stop it. But yeah, so you can save a bunch of loops. A lot of the loops that I have saved here are just key-specific pads that are just kind of set up for drones and stuff like that in live settings. So let's get off that page because it's just not that interesting. And let's take a quick swing through... we can erase right here. There you go. See, double tap to erase. And let's mess around a little bit with using the record functions on here. My timing might be bad. The good thing about Blooper is you don't have to be really good at looping, because you'll see why. So we've got that. Set it to loop. That might be why that start is a little wonky, because the loop was set pretty low. Let's go over to our effects page. So this effects page right here has just kind of some quick go-to stuff that I find to be really, really valuable. You have the ability to switch between additive mode and normal mode, which basically controls whether or not effects running when you have record enabled are printed to your loop, or whether or not they kind of exist outside of it. We'll do a video on Blooper and it'll make sense after that, I promise. But we also have a stability control right here. You can hear that stability at 0 right here. Nice and clean, nice and bright. Tape noise and some warble comes in. You also have the ability to turn each modifier on and off. And so whatever modifier you happen to be on right now, these two things will control. Let's actually, let's put something together really quick. Okay, so I dialed in a kind of a droppery low pass filter kind of thing. So let's hear how that sounds when I turn those on. So it's pretty cool. It sounds good, but you know, I just bent down and I kind of tweaked some knobs to make sure that we got to where we needed to be for this. What if I'm in the middle of it and I just want to find a sound that I know I love quickly? So the way that you would do that is this. Let's turn those on and off. You can use CC controls like I did. I've got a bunch of CC messages telling Blooper exactly how I want it configured in the lo-fi and reverse settings up here. Lo-fi. Oh, there we go. So normal loop, crystal clear, sounds great. Okay, so I just bent down to kind of get to all those settings, but say I wanted something else other than what was already like set up on the pedal at this exact moment. That's where something like that reverse or reverse down comes in. That's two presets on the same switch that gets me to specific blooper modifiers. So they're both on that the mod B switch. So you've got quick access to reverse. As you know, the pedal is currently configured for a low pass, but when I hit that switch, and then if I hit that reverse again, we're now an octave down. And we're back. But I want to get back to more of a lo-fi thing. Well, great news. I have a lo-fi button. And then I can just go through and I can hit unstable, turn my modifiers on. I can set it to additive and print those effects. And now I can reverse that quickly without having to go down to the pedalboard at all. It's pretty much the best. There we go. And I've got a double tap to stop right there without erasing. You may notice that there is a chord build up here. This isn't done yet, but this I'll do an entire video on this later. I'm sorry, I just hit the camera. And play. Sorry, I get distracted by bloopers sometimes. So we're going to erase that. We're going to make our way back home. So one of my favorite things on the planet is mood. A lot of you know that. But it's also a very weird pedal to try to kind of incorporate without something like MIDI. Even with MIDI, it's actually kind of weirdly difficult to incorporate because it's two completely separate types of pedal in one pedal. You've got that micro looper on the right, and you've got a real like wet effects, real-time kind of modulator on the left side, but they're also unified by the clock in the middle. So it's more complex than just sending simple CC messages, but you can really kind of unlock a bunch of really crazy stuff with the MC8 because you can send such specific messages. So like, for example, you have live, which is great because you can switch between different presets as well as going to that live mode, which I love. Live mode, I have no idea what it's set to right now, but let's go to like pitch cycle, which has dip switches. we go over to one of my favorite reverses of all time. Pretty great. So utilizing the right side of mood in this situation is more complicated, clearly. So you can't just send a program change message to pull up the type of loop that you want to create. You have to send CC messages to tell the pedal where the knob should be, as well as what position the switch should be in. So like this right here is going to do like an octave up Drolo reverse loop on the mood. So you press that starts it listening, and then you hit that arm button. So there you go. And similarly, the freeze button does the same thing, but for something a little more time stretchy. Pretty great, but you can do a lot more than that with this. Let's go to page 2, where we have our clock settings. Anytime I pull up a loop setting on here, by default it also sets the clock to noon, which allows me the ability to pitch up, down, and refine that unity pitch. So we've got this loop going right now. Pretty handy. You can see though, we also have a bunch of other stuff on this page, and it's because sometimes you find yourself listening to something like this going, this would be cool downstream. So we've got this loop that we can kind of sit here and we can listen to it kind of churn, but what if we want to capture these kinds of changes? So the left side of this, we have our blooper controls that I have flown over here for such a time as this. So I'm going to go down to Pedalboard cam because it'll be a little bit easier than holding the guitar and navigating all of this hardware. So let's see what we can do with this page. So that's about what's for sale here. That's about what I use it for. This is the kind of like intense creative freedom that you get when you really invest the time in setting this thing up the way that you need it to be set up. So I hope this was useful. I hope you found it really, really helpful. Ask me any questions in the comments down below, and I'll see if I can answer them. Until next time.